welcome taxi member Greg Carrozza from beautiful Albuquerque, New Mexico. How are you, Greg?
Great, doing great. Loving the winter.
How long have you lived in Albuquerque now?
It's a little more than 4 years.
Okay, and you were in
Yeah,
Philadelphia before that, right?
yeah, my whole life before that. Yeah, little
Wow.
different,
You missed the
but
cheesesteaks?
yes, I cannot tell a lie. I miss the cheesesteaks. I miss the bread that really any Philadelphia sandwich is on. That's what's missing, unfortunately, here in New Mexico. But there's lots of other great foods that don't exist on the East Coast too. So not going to knock it. I could
That's
just use
how
a nice hoagie roll from my hoagie or from my cheesesteak.
maybe you should have somebody FedEx you a box. When I left New York, I missed New York City pizza crust. There's something in the water or something. Anyway, um, we could talk about food all day. I
That's
want to talk
true.
to you about your journey with taxi. How long ago did you join, and why did you join initially?
Well, I think it's been about 5 years now that I've been a member. And I joined probably for a common reason that is a bad reason.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
I've known about taxi for many, many years. Saw your advertisements in magazines, probably back into the '90s, and I always thought, oh, I could do music for television if I really put my mind to it, and I just never did. I was busy doing a day job, having a family, and all that stuff, and and after a while of doing a lot of engineering and producing, co-writing with other writers in the Philadelphia area, I was still there when I joined. Um, I had a whole lot of material that was just sitting in the drawer. I work with a lot of great people, great musicians, songwriters, and everybody was terrible at marketing. So all the music was just in the drawer, nothing happening. So I thought, taxi, that's the move. I've got all this material. I can shove it all down taxi's throat with all of the listings that come up, and this is going to work out great. Um, that didn't work out so great. Um, but that was definitely the reason. And unfortunately, that first year too, I think I joined somewhere around the end of January, and before the end of February, we decided to move from Philadelphia to Albuquerque. So that whole year was kind of a wash. I wound up doing nothing. There was so much planning to do to move across the country that my music was way, way down the list of priorities. So I think I probably did a few submissions that year, and they were all rejected, and I wasn't even concerned about that. And also, unfortunately, I missed the very first the rally that year that I joined,
Oh,
because it was exactly the same week that I was driving from Philadelphia to Albuquerque. So I couldn't go.
you should have just kept
Uh,
going. You should have just driven right by Albuquerque.
I, I just thought, "Ah, I can't make it, so I'll let it go and put it out of my mind." But it was toward the end of that week. I remember I left on Monday, and probably by Thursday night when the rally began, I think I was about halfway to Albuquerque. But in any event, so I didn't attend that first year, and and then after I arrived in Albuquerque, it took me some time to get my studio set up and kind of get back into the flow of what do I really want to do and how can I do it, because everything was brand new space, new people, new place, everything.
Yeah. Did you
So
have to, you were a software developer back in the day
mhm.
when you lived in Philly. Did you leave that world and just decide to go after music full time when you moved to Albuquerque, or did that decision
No,
come?
that happened earlier. It
Oh,
was probably it was about 10 years earlier that I had given up software development. And I really just got to the point where I was just very burned out, probably not unlike many people who do that work. I got to the point where I started doing 70, 75, 80 hours of work a week. I had little daughters, and I just didn't want to do that anymore. So I kind of became the stay at home dad.
yeah.
At that time, my kids were younger, and they were still going to elementary school, I think. And My wife was working some more, so I stayed at home. I made the lunches, and I did music. And I guess I made the wrong choice at that time, in that I was doing, as I mentioned, a lot of producing for other artists, co-writing with them, that kind of thing. And I probably should have joined Taxi right then, and I'd be in a different spot right now. But I didn't do that. But
But, you know,
so I spent. That's why I had about 10 years of material. Just, I had a really big drawer filled up with music.
so what caused the light to go on and make you say, well, it's time now that I get serious and serious about doing music for media in particular? Was there a turning point or, an aha moment?
Well, that was probably my move, because when I was in Philadelphia and I worked with a lot of other people, um, I just kept putting on the back burner any things that I could work on by myself, because I just spent a lot of time working with others. And then once I moved across the country and I got all of my equipment set up, and I sat down and I looked around, and there's nobody else here. Here I am by myself. So so what can I do by myself? And that was really the spark that said, well, I can start writing the stuff specifically for the media, um, instead of just trying to shoehorn some things that I had already done. Of course, I continued to do that anyway,
Yeah.
and fail at it. And it wasn't until the following year, when I came to my very first rally, that the light really started to go on, when I started to hear about other people's experiences, and what they were doing and what they were not doing, which is probably more important, in order to succeed. And so that's kind of when I really got the germ and started on what I think was the right path.
Do you remember any things that they were not doing that you could pass along to our viewers?
Well, the first thing, and I tell this to, like I already mentioned, it is to not try to shoehorn material that you already have into listings that you think it might fit with,
Right.
or that you
Mike.
just think, hey, this supervisor is going to love this track for that show, even though they really want this. Um,
Right.
you
Classic.
just you Yeah, it is classic. And it's I try not to get upset with anybody who thinks that, because it's an easy mindset to get into. You put a lot of effort into music. You don't want to see it languish. You don't want to see it sit in a drawer and not be used in any way. But the flip side of that is that's not going to work. Most of the time, it's just not going to work at all. People who want to use what they want to use, they have an idea of what it's going to be. They might not have their finger on it, but they know an idea of what it's going to be. And you've got to get as close to that as you possibly can. And just trying to think that something is good is not enough.
Absolutely. Uh, I'll bet that you've got music from the 80s and 90s sitting in that drawer. You should check out the
Oh yeah.
listings that Taxi runs looking for vintage music, because now with the passage of time, that particular publisher, I happen to love them. I think that they're extremely honorable, unbelievably hardworking, and many of our members have signed vintage tracks that they did back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s with these guys, and they're really good at what they do. So hit me up sometime if you've got some stuff that's been sitting in the drawer that sounds, really dated 80s, 90s stuff. They are now accepting music from the 90s as quote unquote vintage.
Vintage.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That makes me feel a little old.
But
Uh,
that is the one place where you could shoehorn in the old stuff.
Right. I don't know if I've got things. I don't know if they're very good. But I do have some things. I mean, I thought I invented sound on sound recording in the 80s. Uh, Two cassette decks and a keyboard. And I thought I invented it until I read about it in a book a little while after. But,
That's pretty funny. I
yeah, I
know.
was like
Al Gore thought he
15
invented the
years
internet.
old in my bedroom, and I'm playing on the keyboard. I say, wow, what if I play back the tape along with the tape and record it on another tape? That's perfect.
I did that French class language lab in high school where they had a turntable where you'd put the vinyl record on, écoutez, s'il vous plaît, and then you'd repeat it back.
Right.
And they had a cassette player or a reel to reel so you could record your lesson. And I started doing production work in there and got in trouble all the time. I guess my destiny was already, mandated. I just didn't realize it. Um, so, how many different music libraries slash media publishers do you have material with at this stage? Now, let's say you're 5 years into taxi, but 4 years where you really have figured out what you're doing.
Yeah, more like three.
Okay, so over those 3 years, how many different catalogs are you
I
in?
think it's about 13 or 14,
Wow,
something around there.
that's
And it does greatly vary. Like I have just a couple with a couple of tracks with a couple of publishers, and then with some others, I have more like 60 or 70. So it just kind of depends on which ones wanted what at what time. I think along the way, certain publishers will have put out briefs of their own to composers that they have already signed. And so I respond a lot to those, but some
great.
don't do that. Some of them really have just taken the material that they wanted that it got through a taxi forward, and then don't hear from them a lot after that. So it all depends. Others I hear from all the time.
Can you guesstimate how many pieces of music you have in those 13 or 14 libraries in total?
Yeah, it's over 300.
Okay, so it's growing.
Yeah, it's probably around 320, 325, something like that right now. I'm shooting for 500 by the end of this year.
That's great. I was looking at your website earlier, and frankly, as well as we're not like best friends or anything, but I know Greg pretty well. We met. He was in LA like a year and a half ago. We did a taxi TV together. I see him in the chat room on the Quarantini happy hours. We exchange emails every now and then. So I thought I knew him pretty well, but I didn't know how many different albums, and albums in the sense of production music, which is largely instrumental music for film and television. uh, Companies still like to have like a full quote unquote album of EDM or an album of hip hop. If they
Mhm.
find a musician that's very capable of doing a particular genre well, they'll say, can you do 10 or 12 of those for me? So it's not actually an album that goes on a CD and necessarily gets sold out there, but that's the way they like it. If they find somebody that's really good in a genre, can you do 10 more of those? So I was very impressed to see how many of those you had on your website. I was going to mention your website later in this interview, but I'll do it now and I'll do it again later. So if you guys want to check out Greg's music just to get kind of context for this whole discussion, go to gregcarrozzamusic.com, and that's GregCarrozza music.com. I'm practicing my radio voice today. Um,
Nice.
wow, so that's good. In 3 years, you got 300 pieces out there in the wild, and you know, it, my experience from talking to many of Taxi's pretty successful members is once you get over 1,000, that's when the money really starts to roll in. And once you get like to 1,500, you're probably, making a good six-figure income. So it sounds like you're on your way. Um, have you found that some of the companies are better than others? And I guess you could look at that two ways. One, are they better to work with because they're nice people and they're easy to get on the phone or an email? Or, the other way is, do you judge companies by how many placements they get you? So can you kind of speak to both of those things? Have you found some companies better to work with than others?
I would say that in both of those aspects that you mentioned, I found a lot of great ones so far. I mean, as far as being able to go back and forth with the company, it's really helpful because I'm nowhere near perfect yet. And even though I try to get better every day, it's great to work with companies that I can get some feedback from. So, for example, if I do, 4 or 5 tracks of a genre, and they say, "Oh, these are all great, but hey, this one, can you extend the end of the song? It's kind of too short."
Right.
Sure. That's great. That's a great feedback. Or really simple stuff, like, hey, that hand clap's really, really loud. And then I go back and listen to it, and I think, wow, it is. Why
How
did
did
I do
I not
that?
catch that? Yeah.
How did I miss that? So those kind of things are really great. And unfortunately, you don't get the ability to do that when it comes to taxi listings. You've got to try to get it right, the best way you can up front. So, but as you've mentioned many times before, once you do get tracks signed with a publisher or a library, then they kind of accept you,
Right.
and you can. And I don't mean to say, now you can stink and they're okay with it. What I mean to say is you have opportunity for a little bit of back and forth, and that's okay, and that's helpful. I mean, I think I've gotten better at certain things because of that ability of getting more of the direct feedback from those who know more about what they want, and being able to implement it and say, that's okay.
Yeah.
And then the second half of that, like you said about placements, for me personally, I think the jury is still out because the timeline is still not quite there. I have quite a bit of music with publishers whose libraries are exposed outside of the United States, and so while I think some of that is being used, I still haven't found out anything about that. Um,
Let's clarify
so,
that for a minute, because some people might think that you get a phone call or an email every time somebody's going to
mm,
license one of your tracks. So what you're saying, I'm pretty sure what you're referring to is that if your music were in a library that's distributed in Italy and Germany or Asia or wherever, and somebody in one of those countries at a production company is making a TV show and they use a piece of dramedy music, let's say, that you created, they don't call you. They don't even call the
no.
library. They just take it legally, license it by filling out a cue sheet that gets
Mhm.
turned in, and the reason you're not hearing about it is it takes time to go from the PRO in, let's say, Italy to ASCAP or BMI in America, and each of those has a 3 month to 6 month turnaround time, maybe even longer. So you might not find out that a piece of your music was used in 2019 until 2021.
Yep.
Okay.
So that's exactly right. So you said it. I don't need to, but but I do find out about U.S. placements using the website tunesat.com, which you're probably familiar with, and many other people probably are too.
Tell,
And
tell our viewers what it is for those that may not be aware.
Sure. They have, you join as a member, and they've got different levels of membership. You can upload, I think it's somewhere around 50 tracks for free. And then beyond that, there's a pay level, and it can get quite expensive depending upon how many tracks you have. But then they basically use those tracks as a guide, and I believe they listen to broadcasts all over the place and can tell you when your track is used in what show, on what network, what time, date, that kind of thing.
So
So
even though you've not been reached out to by NBC saying we're going to use your instrumental piece in this show, or even the library may not even know,
mhm.
but you can find out through TuneSat. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I believe their selling point is that and there might be cases where you're never compensated for a placement and a usage, and so if they can find it, then you can chase down what however many pennies that's worth. But uh,
Well,
but I'm sure there are times when there are more dollars involved and it's really worth it. And of course, you then would pass that on to your publisher and let them duke it out, because they have at least the equal stake in it. So they're probably more equipped to
chase the money.
to fight, chase it down. Yeah, right.
So let's talk about the issue of people using your music and nobody knowing about it, finding out about it through TuneSat. I think a lot of people who are new, maybe not new to making music, but new to the professional side of the industry, are worried. Gee, if my music is out there, aren't people going to try and steal it or rip it off? My experience is that exactly what you just explained does happen, where a piece of music gets used on a show, but maybe the intern who's supposed to be entering the stuff on the cue sheet forgets to fill out a cue sheet for that episode, or they don't write your piece of music in on the cue sheet. So you're not compensated for it. Um, my experience is yes, that happens. It doesn't happen all that much, but 5% of the time maybe. Do you have any experience or any fear, or let me rephrase that? Do people have any legitimate fear that people in the TV or film industry are going to try and steal their music and use it illegally, or is that really not a thing?
I don't think it's a thing. It certainly hasn't been in my limited experience. And I don't think I would doubt that anybody maliciously wants to do that.
That's the right.
Like you said, obviously mistakes are made. Everybody can make them. Anybody can make a mistake, write down the wrong, I've used the wrong piece of music, or like you said, miss a whole episode. Those kind of things can happen. I don't think anybody's out there willfully attempting to steal. I don't think it's worth it. I mean,
Right.
really, I mean,
Why would they try and screw some poor musician out of 12 seconds of an instrumental cue and risk their entire career or a lawsuit
right.
for doing that?
Right. Because as you've talked about many times, this is a side of the business that is lots of iterations of small increments of money.
Yeah.
So it really isn't worth for somebody to purposely try to use music and save $4 here or $7 there. It doesn't really make any sense.
Let's talk about the money for a second, because you're absolutely right. There might be times you get 72 cents or $4 or $12.68, or another
Mhm.
time that you might get 200 or 300, or get really lucky, have something make it onto a network, a broadcast network like NBC, CBS, ABC, or Fox on a primetime show that's a big deal show that gets syndicated, and you could make a few $1,000s just on the performance side of a deal like that. But I think a lot of people who are new to the industry get their first statement where they've got a placement and go, I just made $12.36 because my music was on the Kardashians.
Yeah.
Eh, eh, That's typical. Nobody's ripping them off. It's not unusual. It's actually typical.
Yeah.
So then it comes down to, as a very wise friend of mine once said, it's a penny business, but you can make a lot of pennies.
Mhm.
So that comes down. Oops, let me turn off my email so I don't get any more alerts. Okay, there we go. So then it comes down to your ability to make a lot of music. And that's also rather not off putting so much as shocking, I think, to people who are just getting into it, going, wow, that guy's got 300 pieces of music out there. And he's planning on doing, like another 200 by the end of this year. It's like, I could never do that. It takes me a month and a half to crank out one piece of music. How do you go from that person that takes days or weeks or maybe even months working on a particular piece of music to somebody who I'm guessing now you can crank out an instrumental cue or two per day? How
Yep.
do you make that transition and take as much time to explain that as you want?
Okay. It took a while. Because that was definitely the next big hurdle after the aha moment that we talked about earlier.
Right.
Because even though I thought, okay, this is what I can do and what I should do, it didn't mean I could do it yet. And definitely that was my first reaction as well. So I think it was, after that first time that I went to the rally, and I thought, okay, I've got to start hunkering down. How much music do I think I can write? And I thought, okay, I'm going to try to write one track per week, or around 50 by the next year. And at that moment, I thought that is a lot, because I never really thought I did that before or could ever do that. So I think that so I set out to write 50, and I did. I wrote more than 50, actually, maybe 60 something, maybe 70. And so that was really that year. And a lot of that music stinks. by the way. but but that year then taught me that the way to do it is to keep setting the bar higher and higher for yourself. Set the goal and meet it, and figure out the ways to meet it. And then that's why in the next year I said, okay, I'm going to write 100, and I wrote more. And then last year I said I'm going to write 200, and I wrote 196. So I didn't make it to 200 last year.
What a loser.
But yeah, what a loser. So that's why now, after this, this time has passed, now I think, wow, I've probably written nearly 400 pieces, and 325 are out there. But I look at it the opposite way. I'm thinking, wow, I don't have anywhere near enough music. I need a whole lot more music. As opposed to having the attitude from just a few years ago of how could I possibly write that much music that fast, right? So it came with setting the goal and making sure that I meet it. And I made sure I met it by learning, and not easily, but learning to pick the battles in the process, meaning decide what are the important decisions that you've got to spend time on, and what are the non-important decisions that you probably waste a lot of time on.
Okay.
And that's again, that's not easy. And it's also maybe not a lot of that, you can be instructed, you kind of learn along the way. And I guess it can be specific to whatever you're doing. For example, something is very popular is hip hop music right now. So you might say, okay, you should spend a lot of time making sure that your kick drum and your 808 bass sounds are very clear, loud, punchy, that kind of thing. But the next track, you don't have to do that all over again. You've got a good basis to start on. And B, there are other aspects that you don't have to worry about. Like maybe you don't need really excellent, catchy melodies. You're really focusing more on the rhythmic elements of it and the mood, whether it be, kind of an aggressive mood or just a melancholy mood. And what's difficult, but asks for a lot, is happy hip hop, which you don't hear if you listen to the radio or you listen to commercial recordings of songs. There's not a whole lot of hip hop music that's happy, but there's a lot of requests for that because because users want to impart that mood, but use that more cutting edge style, particularly in, a lot of your reality TV shows or advertisements, that kind of thing. So again, you kind of learn over time that what are the important decisions, what aren't the important decisions, and don't spend a lot of time on the non-important decisions. Of course, that's easier said than done. It's easy to sit there and say, do I like this snare? Do I like this snare? In these days you can go through a list of 100 snares, before you. So what you've really got to do is pick one, move on.
So
pick something, move on.
Perfectionism is the enemy of productivity. And
absolutely.
This begs the question, because a lot of people get very precious about their music. It's their art. It's their life. It's what comes out of their soul. And I completely understand that, having worked on making records for many years. But I don't think of production music that ends up in reality shows or dramatic television or wherever. I don't think of it as a lesser art form. It's a different art form. And while you might, on an Adele record, spend a week getting a perfect piano sound because it's just her voice and a cello in that piano, it really doesn't matter for a piece of music that's going to end up in an episode of a reality show. So some people would be turned off by that and go, why would I even want to do that canned music? But if they listen to the stuff that's in production music libraries, they would hear a lot of music that would blow them away.
Oh, yeah.
So clearly you and your peers have figured out ways to create templates that can be used over and over again. So you're not starting from ground zero.
Mhm.
Having a little notepad with 4 snare sounds that could be used on almost anything in hip hop rather than going through 2 hours of searching every time. Is that a fair summary?
Oh, absolutely. I do exactly those kind of things. I've been using like a template in my DAW for, I don't know, decades probably. Color coding all the types of instruments and presetting. What I normally do is preset a bunch of tracks, color code them, name them appropriately, give them a different bus so I can group them together. And I'll get into why I did that. And put effects on them. Already have the effects plugged in on my return channels, that kind of stuff, because then everything is ready to go. I don't have to do a lot of thinking about setting up a mix or anything like that. It basically mixes itself. I wind up not having to do a whole lot of mixing because there's so many of the decisions that took some time to get to in the first place are now done. And
Right.
of course, there are times when they say, oh, you know what, that reverb's not right for this song, so I'm going to change it out, or I need a whole lot more delay on this particular instrument, or that kind of thing. So of course you can always tweak it, but it's a baseline to begin at that you don't have to make a whole bunch of decisions that you've already made. And one of the other advantages of that, and we might get to it in the future, is but a lot of for most publishers, I've got to deliver not just the track, but different versions of the track. Some want different, what they would call an alternate mixes of the track. So maybe take out the main melody, or maybe just be the drums and the bass, and maybe just the drums. And others want actual stems, which would be groups of instruments that you could then lay back together to create the full mix. So like all the drums are one track, basses maybe as a track, guitars, keyboards, vocals, that kind of thing. And then someone can lay them all together and say, this is the track exactly the way the mix is, so that you might, for example, there might be sections where you just want to use the drums. There might be sections where you want to duck the vocals down quieter. There are myriad of ways that might get used. So setting all that up ahead of time in your DAW makes it really easy. So like I have a group, all the red tracks, they're all in a folder of tracks. They're the drums. I hit mute everything else and bounce the drums, and I'm done. It takes 1 minute. There's no thinking. There's no worrying about it's not right. It's easy because I set it up ahead of time. And so those are the kind of things that save you a lot of time along the way, that then get you to the point where you can just move more quickly.
I'm not a composer, but if I were, and I've posited this in the past, and people have tended to agree with me, that if I were a composer and I did exactly what you just described, and I came up with a hip hop piece that was kind of dangerous and ominous sounding, and I really liked it, I would think to myself when I'm done, gee, I've got all the elements, literally all the elements showing up in faders, in my DAW. I might as well do one now that's a happy hip hop piece. Might I
Mhm.
have to, take out some minor chords or some sevenths, or use a brighter, less dark reverb and modify to taste? But yeah, so you could basically spend a whole week cranking out more hip hop stuff with your basic 808s or whatever your template is, and just altering the melody and the chord changes and other minor changes to make it go from dark to light, make it go from somber to happy. And at the end of the week, you could have 5 or 6 tracks that were done very time efficiently.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I've probably done both versions of that. There have been times when I've taken a track that I'd already done and used the rhythm and changed all the sounds. And so the rhythm was the same.
Yeah.
Maybe I altered the tempo a little bit depending upon what the track needed to be, but I didn't redo the rhythm, kept everything the same, changed all the sounds. And then there have been other times when I just did what you described, which is I used all the same sounds, just wrote an entirely different piece, use all the same sounds. They all fit the same part of the overall structure of the song, but it's a different song. And yeah, those are great. Those are also great ways to be more efficient, particularly when you know that what you're starting with is appropriate. I mean, obviously, particularly, and I do that a lot. I work with. I mean, I did that when before I really had very many pieces signed. Um, I would I would only operate on the tracks that I did that Taxi forwarded. I thought, okay, if I got this returned, it was for whatever reason it was. I'm going to put that aside. I'm going to work with what did I do right, and so in those cases, I would be able to maybe take a lot of the similar sounds, make a new track, that kind of thing, and only operate from those. And then later go back and try to work on things like why I got something returned and how I can improve on it, and really incorporate that feedback, which is
Oh,
also difficult. I don't know if that's a topic for a discussion, but it is difficult.
yeah,
It's
let's talk
difficult to
about it.
get.
I think it's very
Sure.
valid. It wasn't on my list, but please talk about it.
I'll make it quick because you have other questions to get to, but it's difficult, and everybody's experienced it, and everybody who's a member knows it's difficult to get that return. You put in a lot of effort, you think it's as good as it can be, and then it turns out to not be. For doesn't even matter why, for the purpose of our discussion. Let's say there are valid reasons why.
Mhm.
That feels horrible. It feels like you are never going to be able to write something good. But you absolutely have to disassociate the feeling from the actual feedback and do the best that you can with objectively um, accepting what the feedback is and attempting to incorporate it into that track to make it better, and into other ones that you do to make them better. And again, that's hard, but that's imperative. There's just no way that you're going to succeed. You're not going to. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, right, and expecting a different outcome. So you can't do that. You've got to change, and you got to understand what those changes are. And I think that's one of the great things that Taxi does, for every member, is to provide the feedback that you need. Because if Taxi didn't exist, and the only method was to say go down a list of publishers cold and start sending them music, you're not going to get any feedback.
Right.
They're not going to tell you, hey, you stink. They're
Yeah,
just going to tell you, you're just going to get nothing.
they're not
Obviously.
in the business of giving feedback because feedback
Right.
doesn't generate income for them. They're in the
Right.
business of getting music licensed, and that's where they have to concentrate their time effort. Uh,
Right. So if without that feedback, you've got no way to improve, and to get good enough. And yeah, I don't know where it would come from without Taxi. Particularly for me personally, I
uh,
don't know where it would come from. I wouldn't be better and getting better without that feedback.
well, thank you for saying that. I mean, there are sites where musicians congregate, forums and such, and Facebook groups. But I have looked at many of those over the years, and the feedback is amateurish, personality based,
Mhm.
often harsh, largely unproductive, and not moving you forward. Whereas the taxi screeners are real live professionals that are really good at giving feedback. And we see people improve dramatically over the course of a year if they can avoid the sting, because it does hurt when you
Mhm.
put a lot of effort. And the screeners understand that. They're all musicians. Um, so they understand you put all this effort into something, and somebody says, not quite there yet, George. It's like, well, damn it. Why can't you forward it like it is? Maybe somebody else will disagree and think it's totally there. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion. Let's go
Sure.
back to talking about music libraries, which, for in case somebody doesn't know, I feel a sneeze coming. In case somebody doesn't know, a production music library is a publisher that's film and TV and media specific, and it's a catch-all phrase. Some libraries do songs, some do instrumentals, some do both, but they're all in the business of being purveyors of music to the networks, the production companies, the shows that need the music. So it frustrates a lot of taxi members that get forwarded by taxi. They read a listing, they make a piece of music, they send it in, the screener hears it, goes, damn good job, I'm going to forward that, and it does in fact go to the music library that requested it. And now this poor member is just tortured by the fact that they don't hear anything. A week goes by, 2 weeks go by, 3 weeks go by, and they don't hear anything. What would you say to help salve the wounds of those members who I legitimately feel for them in my heart because I know that it's torture? Will they ever hear? How long does it typically take? If they don't hear back in 24 to 48 hours, is it a dead issue? Talk about it all, please.
Well, that's absolutely right. If it's especially at the beginning, especially when you've gotten the first few forwards and you think this is it. Now they're forwarded and now everything, and that's just not the case. It's just the next it's just the next step in the progression of everything, because as you know, once the music is forwarded, anything can happen at that point. The publisher or the library or the supervisor, whomever was requesting it, their needs may have changed. They may have found what they were looking for from an entirely different source in the meantime. All kinds of things can happen that lead to that forwarded just not meaning anything. But I've gone from hearing from a forward the next day to 9, 10 months later. I think that's probably the range. My personal range. So that's huge.
Well, we have
And
people that quit. They get to the end of their
yeah,
membership and they quit 6 months in because, I've had 20. We had somebody recently, I had 21 things forwarded and I didn't get a deal. And it's been, 6 months. I want my money back. And I'm like, dude, you're going to hear from at least one of those, if not five of those, over the next few months. Just be patient.
yeah, it just takes time. My personal experience was it was over 90 forwards. So, and let me clarify that. So earlier on, I think I signed one or two songs. That was like throwing a dart at the wall. Some old songs that I had done, and I actually got them forwarded and got them signed into a couple of non-exclusive libraries. They never got any placements or anything like that. That had happened once or twice, but it took me over 90 forwards of my original instrumental tracks before I signed a deal.
Wow.
And I honestly, I was close to writing you a letter.
I bet you were.
because
It's
just because again, until it actually happens, you really don't know what the process is going to be like,
right. If people
because
doubt if the listings are even legitimate or if we're even sending the music out, which, clearly we are because thousands of people have gotten deals. But from the perspective of a musician who's had 90 pieces of music sent to companies, allegedly, and not hearing anything, I can certainly understand why they're sitting at home going, this is a load of crap.
right, I got to the point where I self-dubbed myself the silver medalist, the best of all the losers. uh,
Oh, man. That's harsh.
um, well, it felt that way for a while, but eventually, once I got track signed with different publishers, that all changed, and then my attitude towards it changed. I mean, I continue to submit to listings all the time, and I still get things returned. I think my ratio is getting better. It's not as good as I want it to be, but it's getting better. I think most recently, I just took a look at it. In December and January, I think I had 15 out of 17 submissions forwarded.
That's good.
So that's probably like the best I've ever done.
By the way, sorry to interrupt, but it sounds like your hand's hitting the microphone or something.
Oh, sorry about that. I'll try not to do that. It's the Italian in me. I move my hands too much. I'll try to. Yes, I'll try to keep them still.
It could be your knee touching table. I don't know. I'm just hearing some rumbling when you're talking.
No,
Um,
it's probably all the hand talking. So I'll keep them still.
um, all right. So, yeah, I think you addressed that really well. It's just got to be a matter of faith and know that thousands of people have come before you and have gotten deals through taxi, and that you're not being singled out. You're going through a process that the majority of them also went through, which is, damn, I've had all these things forwarded and I'm waiting and I'm waiting and waiting. So the faith part comes in where you just have to keep focused on the prize, which is, I'm just going to keep making music as I get better with every new one I make. And eventually the dam will open up. And sounds like that's exactly what happened for you.
Yeah, it definitely is like a dam opening, because it because once that happens and you've got a publisher here and a publisher there, and they start sending out their own briefs, and they ask for 5 or 10 or 12 tracks, so now all of a sudden they will all be signed, they will all be published, um, and it's not like I'm creating this one track and keeping my fingers crossed, so you kind of build that relationship, and they kind of that kind of opens up like that. But it does take the time. As we've discussed before, it's just an extremely long game,
Yeah.
and we're just and people aren't really cut out. Many people aren't cut out for that, where they expect instant gratification on things, and this is not the business to be in if that's what you expect. It's an extremely long game. It takes a long time to get better. It takes a long time to get feedback. It takes a long time for anybody to try to sign the material. It takes a long time for anything to get placed. It takes a long time for you to get paid for anything that was placed. And then you just add that all up, and
But the good news
it's a long
is
time.
that if you are the last guy standing on the field, because everybody who walks off of the playing field is a loser. And I'm not saying that to berate them. I'm just saying they've lost the game by virtue of
Yeah,
the fact that they haven't finished the game. So if
yeah.
you stay on the field long enough and you keep getting music forwarded and you keep getting music signed and you keep impatiently waiting for some placements to show up, over time it becomes cumulative. And one day, the first dam that opens up is the belief system that this is going to work. The next dam that opens up is you make a couple $1,000 in a year, and then the next year you make 12,000. And over time, it becomes cumulative. And all those years of pain that you went through in the beginning are the foundation for your financial well-being down the road.
Hmm.
It's hard to get people to believe that, and I certainly understand why it's hard for them to believe it. But if there's anything I could change about musicians who want to get into this aspect of the business, it would be to wave my magic wand and have them all just have blind faith and hang in there ad infinitum, because eventually they're going to go, boy, am I glad I hung in there. And it sounds
Yeah.
like that's been the case for you. Um, do you have any advice to new taxi members that'll help them get results more quickly?
Well, I think it really comes down to really listening to the examples in the listings and breaking down the aspects of those examples and why they are the examples, and figuring out what's important about them and using them in your own compositions. And what I've learned about in listening closely is that the mood, the tempo, and the general layout of the pieces is what is really important. So,
Mhm.
for example, if there are 3 examples, and they've all got guitar in them, and you don't play the guitar, don't try to write something for that listing, because guitar is probably important.
Right. It sounds idiotically obvious, but I
Yeah.
think a lot of people may overlook that. So thank you for bringing that
Yeah.
up.
So yeah, and obviously that's an overly simplistic answer, and tempo is important. You typically all the examples on the listing will be in a fairly narrow tempo range.
Mhm.
So don't be trying to write something much slower or much faster. Be in that tempo range. Have the same mood. If all the examples are minor keys, don't write a major key track, or vice versa.
Seems so obvious.
It does, but I know that I failed to follow even that advice myself early on. I didn't recognize what the important things in those examples were, and it takes some time to really to listen to them and really absorb what is important. And then the next layer of importance is really more of the specifics about those listings. Does the song start with, percussive elements? Does it start without them and they come in later? Does it use really digital synthetic sounds? Does it use really analog synthetic sounds? Does it have this kind of effects on the vocals, or does it have vocal effects but no singing? These kind of things. So all that kind of stuff is really important, and those even might be the kinds of things that aren't being consciously listened to by the screener or by the requester, but they know that when you do it and it's like that, they know it's like it. And when you don't do it like that, it's not. And it is not imparting the mood and the feel that is what is ultimately needed, because that is what is ultimately needed in this aspect of music. It's the mood. It is the what is being looked for is that the music projects the feeling that the whomever is using it wants, the editor, the supervisor, the advertiser, whatever. They're trying to evoke a certain feeling inside of a box. They want it to be hip hop, or they want it to be pop, or they want it to be rock and roll, or whatever. But they want it to be rock and roll, and they want it to be real happy. Or they want it to be hip hop, or they want it to be really sad. Those are the marks that you have to hit. And listening to the examples and finding what's important there and using that in your own composition is what's important.
So you're not actually saying that somebody should try and clone. I'm going to use the Rolling Stones song "Miss You" because I think every person on the planet knows that song. So you would listen to it and go, okay, that's probably a Telecaster, and I hear the kind of part he's playing is very almost staccato and has an attitude about it. And the vocal definitely has an attitude about it. And let's see, the kick drum and the bass are almost doing like this popping disco thing.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the things that people should absorb and try and work into their thing to the extent that they possibly can. But when oftentimes people try and clone the song and come out with something that sounds like an imitation of
Right.
"Miss You," and that's not what they want, because that's dangerous, it's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
unethical, and it's just dangerous. So I like the fact that you're talking about all those elements, but ultimately it's the mood, the attitude, and as we say so often in the listings, the vibe, which is a Hollywood word for that all-encompassing, almost indescribable thing that if it's not there, you'd know it, but trying to describe how to do it is really hard.
Right. It all comes down to the feeling that you evoke and what is required for a particular usage. And that's hard. And like you said, I mean, it is also a pitfall to clone the examples.
Mhm.
You can find yourself doing that, not even purposely.
Right.
Um, just that in trying to be like it, you are being too much like it. Um, and you might find yourself using the same chords, you might find yourself being in the same key, that kind of stuff. So then those are the kind of things to be conscious of and make sure you don't do them. So I never do a track in the key of any of the examples
Oh.
of the listing, just because even if I find there's something about, I might use a lot of the similar chords. If I do them in the same key, it's going to sound too much like that track. But if I just change the key, I'm doing it a lot. I'm not as close to it as far as the feeling and the sound of it. And another thing about keys too is you really have to watch out what keys you choose to do things in, particularly when it comes to hip hop and pop, and you're trying to keep the low frequencies in check. Like you, it's great to do hip hop tracks in G minor or F sharp minor, because then your 808 is at that frequency that was the original of the 808 drum. I believe it was a G originally, if I'm not mistaken, which is somewhere around I don't know, 50 hertz or 40 something. And if you do, so
I've had to even think about that.
well, that's really important, because that's where you get the most impact. And so if you start trying to write hip hop tracks in C, you've now got to use the bass that's too high or too low. And that's a bad move. So you don't want to do that.
It's like trying to take Tyrion from Game of Thrones, who's 4 feet 4 inches tall, and make him into a 6-footer by stretching it digitally. It's not the same thing.
No.
You know, and this is the sonic version of that by changing the key.
Right.
Interesting. I don't think in all the years I've been doing this and all the people I've interviewed, nobody's ever brought up that point. So kudos to you for thinking about that, and recognizing it and voicing it. Do you think it's true that film and TV publishers are looking for music that's usable versus trying to find the most talented genius composer of the year? I've just discovered the next Hans Zimmer. Are they looking for Hans Zimmer? Or are they looking for, I don't want this to sound bad, but something that's like almost so idiotically simple yet classy and good. Oh, I can hear how that would be used to improve this scene. So I know that I'm answering my own question, but I know you're going to agree with me that they're not looking for Hans Zimmer, because they're not scoring a major motion picture, blockbuster thing for Warner Brothers. They need a piece of music that makes somebody sad because it's a sad scene.
Yeah, and it's always what meets the need, and not what you might think is empirically great or greatest. And it's a little hard to grapple with too. I mean, it's easy to think, oh, I've got to be great. I have to do something that is great. And that's not it. What you've got to do is something that is eminently usable. And what usable is probably not great by definition. If something is great, it's going to draw your attention
away from
right
dialogue. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, even Hans Zimmer in a multi-million-dollar epic film, the music is still, for the most part, not meant to take your attention.
Right.
There may be moments, for a composer of a film, there are of course moments when the music is supposed to take your attention, but generally it is not. And one of the things that makes composers like him and John Williams great is the ways that when they are supposed to be the focus, it's awesome. And when they're not supposed to be the focus, it's still awesome. And so that's why they're great. But it needs to be eminently usable, and it's got to be something that is good to listen to, meets the mood that's trying to be evoked, but isn't so great that it's something that the viewer listens to and doesn't pay attention to the content that they're supposed to be paying attention to.
A good example, and I think Hans Zimmer did Pirates of the Caribbean, I believe. The scene where Jack Sparrow is in that giant water wheel and he's running inside of the wheel and the bad guys are chasing him. The music makes your heart race because there's no dialogue. There's the occasional, oh crap, or something like that, but there's no legit dialogue in there. So the scene is heavily dependent on the music. Take another scene where Jack Sparrow is having a witty little, repartee with Keira Knightley. And in that case, the music is going to very much lay in the background so that you catch all the nuance of that conversation. So you're 100% right. And Hans Zimmer has to do both of those and know when to do them. Are there any genres? Can you rattle off the list of genres that you've worked in so far since you've been doing production?
That's tough.
That's fine. But
it's big. I mean, I do quite a lot of pop and hip hop and and variations on those, like tropical pop or tropical house, or deep house, and in hip hop I do trap music, or a lot of things that are more old school, and in addition to doing things that are more like tension and dramedy, but that use the hip hop rhythms, that kind of stuff. But I also do a whole lot of piano playing. So I do things that are kind of built around that, solo piano or solo with some other orchestral instruments as well. Some jazz. Um, Anything else? Probably more, but
I think I saw EDM. I
yeah,
couldn't
yeah.
mention that, but it's interesting that you just brought up piano. This leads to a point I wanted to make a little later, but I'll bring it up now, which is songwriters and artists hear the word composer and they think of John Williams conducting an orchestra or somebody, charting stuff. Uh, and they're probably not aware that the vast majority of music they hear in television, other than score that's done on, a drama or something like that, but especially reality TV or contest type television, where it's like, battle of the whatever strongest man in the world, that music is done by people like you. It's not done by John Williams or Hans Zimmer. It's done by all the Greg Carrozzas out there who have found that there's a way to earn a nice living doing this music, working from a 10 by 12 bedroom in your house or your basement, wherever.
Mhm.
A lot of artists and songwriters don't understand that they are probably capable of being composers, that they don't have to chart anything, they don't have to conduct an orchestra. And the fact that you mentioned solo piano led me to this point, which is, um, could you play cocktail to viewers who are, piano players? Could you play a cocktail jazz piece for 90 seconds and put a little button ending on it? Could you play a somber piano that might be good with a cello added to it for a family that's in the limousine leaving a funeral? Could you play something light that sounds like springtime is here? And the answer to those questions for most people is going to be, yeah, I can. Well, guess what? You're a composer. You're not just a songwriter. You're not just an artist.
Yep.
Is that a fair take on that from me? Do you?
Oh, absolutely. I've done all of those things actually that you mentioned, uh,
Okay.
for sure. I think what's daunting for some people and what's difficult to wrap your head around is it's kind of switching between the right brain of the creation
Mm.
and the left brain of the execution. Um, I think that is really, when it comes down to it, becomes the difficult thing. Being able to go from, do I play this chord and did I capture this sound properly over here? And being able to keep weaving yourself back and forth in that process. Like, I'm sure as your experience is from way back in the day, is that when an artist would come into the studio, they may come in with a song mostly complete or almost complete, and they may work with the producer on what's going to happen, and then they track the whole thing, and then you mix the whole thing, and then you send it off to a mastering engineer and they master the whole thing.
Yeah,
And that was probably the typical progression of the process,
exactly.
compartmentalizing those aspects. Well, that's not what I do at all. I'm doing the whole circle of things right from the beginning of the process. Just like I mentioned earlier, like having a DAW template where a lot of my mix is already done, that's the mixing stage. That's later, but no, I'm doing it up front. I'm taking that part out that I don't have to think about it, so I can lay down, some of the instruments and not have to think about the mixing. But a lot of the times I do a part, and then how it sounds with everything else is just as important as what I'm playing. So I stop the playing portion process and go over to the mixing process, and do a little bit of that, and then go back and it's a lot of back and forth, and it's a lot of moving from those different aspects of the process until you're done. It's more of an iterative process as opposed to a linear one. And that's I guess that's a difficult thing for those people who are good at and want to stay in one of the processes.
Right.
Because there are great composers and songwriters who don't have the ability to execute their creations. And that's okay. Because maybe if they tried, they'd have to steal some of their creative. They have to steal some of their, their brain power away from the creativity in order to do execution, and they wouldn't come up with the great material that they do. But I think to be successful in doing this type of music in this industry is you've got to master that iterative process and be able to accomplish all the aspects of the process, typically by yourself or with a little help from friends. If I don't play the guitar, and I can call somebody and say, hey, please play the guitar and send me the track, kind of a thing.
But yeah, I've listened to some of your music as recently as a half an hour before we did this today, and there's not a lack of creativity. It's not like people should understand that the production music libraries of today are not the canned music libraries of yesteryear. That
Mm-hmm.
because independent musicians working out of home studios like you are now the norm, the quality is there where it used to be, come on, let's crank this piece out in a hurry because it was a room full of union cats in an expensive studio. And like, yeah, that's good enough. Well, nowadays, the bar has been raised and let me put this in the form of a question. Do you ever feel like your creativity is stifled doing what you do?
Oh, no, not at all. Um, I think personally, I think it's the other way around.
Wow.
If I weren't being creative enough, then whatever I do would just sound just like anything else. I mean, just like any music at all for whatever purpose, you still want it to stand out. You still want it to be um, different from what else there is that is available. Um, you just have to, again, be careful that it stands out so much that it becomes unusable because of that. But you still want to differentiate yourself as best you can, and the only way to do that is with some creativity. So I don't think it's stifled at all.
I've still got plenty more questions. So I'm going to say this is the end of part one and turn this into a two-parter.
Oh,
So
wow.
for those of you
Okay.
who've been watching us, thanks for hanging in for part one. And next month you'll get to see part two right back here with Greg Carrozza. I also want to mention that down below the video you can see a link to his website. You should go there. It's Greg Greg Carrozza Craaozza music.com. GregCarrozzamusic.com. And on there, you'll see his bio, you'll see his music, most importantly. And you should go, after you've listened to this much of this interview, go there and listen to his music. And then next month, you can listen to the second half of the interview, and it will put everything into very good perspective. So thanks for doing part one, Greg. And we'll see you on the flip side.
Sounds great. Thanks, Michael.